Thank you, and thank you for staying through the end of the presentations. And I want to share with you recent work at Cornell about the prospects of controlled environment agriculture in New York today. We have an ongoing study focusing on lettuce and tomato, and I will share with you this. So the status quo in New York State is basically the following. When we think about lettuce, spinach, strawberries, tomatoes, and other types of products, what we see today is that if you take pounds per capita of consumption and what percent of this demand is met by supply from out of state, the numbers are in general over 90% for most vegetables in particular, and some of the fruits. So at the same time, we know that there is a growing demand for local products. Local is being used as an attribute for marketing in different retail settings, from farmers markets to restaurants to supermarkets. We know that that demand is growing. It's very small still, about 1% of total supply of food. Only one of the total, only 1% is sold as local, but it's growing. For example, another fact is in retailing is growing. For example, Whole Foods has doubled the local program in just 4 years, and they are planning to continue growing this program in the future. And also in food service, National Restaurant Association, locally grown is the top top produce trend in 2015 for this association. So the demand is there, but we have always the problem of being so seasonal in the Northeast. That is difficult. And we also have the problem that for many years we thought that greenhouses in the Northeast and in New York in particular were not viable economically. And there are technologies evolving and costs are evolving and production technologies evolving in such a way that there are already some proofs of concept that this is not necessarily true. And we see a lot of interest in growing this industry in New York and also in the Northeast. So, and this is done through controlled environment agriculture, CEA grown, which is the topic of the discussion today. The economics of the bulk part economics of a greenhouse in the Northeast is basically, say in the case of lettuce, you have about $1 million for 1 acre of CEA lettuce in average, depending on the location, depending on the type of greenhouse, but in average 1 million. In average, your energy costs are about $125,000 per year, particularly in New York. You employ 7 people. The yield is about 1 million pounds, and the gross revenue can be between 1 and 3 million, depending on productivity and depending on your production decisions. So this CEA technology is given for a 1 acre, but is scalable to any other size of a greenhouse. Okay, so these are the economics. The economics are attractive. If you look at this as an investment that involves relatively high amount of capital, the returns in the future, if this is true, are interesting. So what are we seeing in the past 5 years in New York? And this is data from the Census of Agriculture. We see tremendous growth. We are still small in vegetable production in greenhouses, but it's growing. I'm showing you comparing 2007 to 2012, 5 years. So we have more than double the number of operations in New York involving vegetable production. The wholesale value has increased dramatically, not to the same extent, but it has increased, meaning that many of these greenhouses are still relatively small, of the new greenhouses. Then, in terms of acres, in 2007 we have about 70,000 acres on greenhouses. 2012 we have about 114, and today we have much more than this that we haven't captured there in the data. Yeah? So the growth in greenhouse vegetables between the 2007 and 2012 census data, they have increased by 54% in value in 5 years. And today now, for example, a state like New York ranks second in terms of production of greenhouse vegetables. So I belong to a group led by Neil Matson, horticulture, Cornell, and Julie Stafford from the Institute for Food Systems in the Food Science Department. We have a group. We are about 30 people, and this group includes academics, includes financiers, and includes farmers, and includes interested in control environment agriculture. So this group of people is growing over time. We have now retailers, New York retailers, wholesalers, and food service operators that are belonging to our group, because the group is trying to figure out what is going to happen in the future with greenhouse vegetable production in the state, which is poised to grow. Okay. So the question is, why isn't there more CEA? What isn't there are more CEA facilities in New York State? So one is securing financing for capital-intensive business with relatively low margins is difficult. Availability of labor, both skilled and unskilled labor, to manage greenhouses. We need a processing and marketing infrastructure, investment in this capacity, and relatively expensive electricity. And what I'm going to talk today is what's happening, particularly in terms of electricity use in greenhouses that is changing the economics of the business today. So we see just an example of things that are happening. We have in the show Gotham Greens, Chicago and New York. They added the 60,000 square feet facility in the Queens, the largest of the fourth that they have. Impressive. And they got for this a $1 million in NYSERDA. NYSERDA, for those of you who are are not from New York, is our energy and power regulator activity at the state level. So with funding an incentive from NYSERDA for energy efficient technologies in greenhouse production. So these things that are happening both in metropolitan areas, but also in areas near big metropolitan centers and in more rural areas. So we know that light is key for production of greenhouses year-round. So we have done lots of experiments at Cornell here and in the Northeast, where we are, for example, in Ithaca, New York. Without added light, it will take for us 105 days to harvest lettuce, for example, in this case. And we will have zero cost in light. With added light, we can grow in 35 days, produce year-round, but our cost is very high. It's about $6 per square foot of greenhouse that we have, and that's relatively high. So light is key here in Ithaca. If you have been there, those of you who are there probably you had gray skies. We don't have a lot of light in Ithaca. So this is the distribution of light during per year and per month during this period. So you see that light is variable and is relatively low. So light is key. So I'm going to give you a comparison that is going to help me illustrate how the economics of greenhouses in the Northeast and in New York is changing. So energy is the second item in terms of costs in a greenhouse after labor. If we think about carbon footprint, which is closely related to costs in general in any type of production. So when we consider lettuce imported to New York that is transported about 3,000 miles in average, the carbon footprint is about 0.7 pounds of CO2 per pound of lettuce produced. Today, or till recently, locally grown in New York, with light and heating a greenhouse, our carbon footprint is about 3 times. It's about 2 pounds of CO2 per pound of lettuce, so double the production of CO2 per pound of lettuce. Very inefficient from a carbon footprint perspective, but also from the economics, okay? So, however, Cornell and Rensselaer have an ongoing project, have been working with them for several years, working on greenhouse lighting and systems engineering group that is called the GLASS group. So the group has identified that there are very important advances that are possible in the dynamic greenhouse control of light and CO2 production, because CO2 reduces the need for electric light by 50%. If we use effective use of the CO2, that will represent savings in terms of energy, electric light, and also in terms of the efficacy of light delivery. So there are Rensselaer in particular is working in important improvements in the efficiency of diodes by 50%. By 50%, you use half the light to produce the same effect on the plant, using the same to have the same effect on the plant. And also better management of the temperature and optics of how you direct light in greenhouses, that can add savings of 15%, of becoming more efficient using light. And this is work that has been ongoing for about 5 years with formal funding, but there is a group in Cornell that have been working with this for about 25 years. So with this type of work, we are working on examples. This is an example of a CO2 enrichment of baby leaf, arugula, spinach, and lettuce in these chambers. So if we focus on energy, the focus of this product, we can change this relationship because of advances in lighting, reducing heat loss, and greenhouse control. And we have proof of concept that this type of greenhouse can be the production of CO2 per pound of lettuce may be comparable to the lettuce that is coming from far away, from the West, for example, okay, from the Western US. So it's, instead of being 2 pounds of CO2 per pound of lettuce, we are showing that it may be as low as 0.6 pounds per pound of lettuce. So what does light control? Just to review, light is very important for many, many aspects key to growth: germination, flowering, branching, plant height, pigments, biomass accumulation, plant immunity and defense, stress tolerance, but also nutrients. We have worked that light has very important impact on the nutritional content of the product and on pharmaceuticals. So we see, for example, the use of ZMAP, experimental Ebola treatment, antibodies that are synthesized by tobacco plants that are being in test by the EPA, by the what? Yes, exactly. Thank you. So this is technology that is being proved. Everything is greenhouse production. It's not only food, but also uses in pharmaceutical industries like this that we have. Now, there is another factor that is very important in New York is this matching dairy manure anaerobic digesters, for which Cornell has been doing work for at least 15 years with commercial greenhouses. So the system is as follows: is the collection system of the waste, then the anaerobic digesters, then it goes either to gas handling system to produce heat or to generate electricity through a generator. And then the effluent storage has to be done somewhere. So in New York, we have about 600,000 cows, dairy cows. New York is the second largest producer of milk and dairy in the country. These cows produce about 600 metric tons of biogas daily. So the anaerobic digester that you see here produces electricity, wastes heat, and improves manure management on farm. So these are the scientists that are working on this. So if we are able to use these systems and matching them to greenhouses, we know that we will need about 850 cows, milking cows, on anaerobic digesters to provide waste heat that we can use to heat and to light a 6,400 square feet of a greenhouse. Yeah? So these are all proofs of concept that we have. So if we have 600,000 dairy cows, just a back of the envelope calculation, we can hit about 100 acres of greenhouses with these cows that we have in New York, for which we are completely wasting the manure. So that means that we can produce 100 million pounds just lettuce per year, and that will be about half of the annual demand for lettuce in New York. So these are important possibilities that we have in terms of the use of sources of energy. So that from the supply side. So now the question was, okay, because all these efforts are trying to take advantage of the concept of local. It's local. So the question is, would having a greenhouse vegetable produced locally be valid, will have face validity to consumers? Or would consumers believe that something produced in a greenhouse is completely synthetic, is not natural, they will not buy it? So for that, we did consumer willingness to pay as part of this project. For the local greenhouse vegetables, we focus on tomato and lettuce in this example. So what we did is basically to manipulate the origin, either New York State versus out of state, and the production system, either a tomato or a lettuce that was field grown versus grown in greenhouse. And we also manipulated the information. Will people change opinions as we tell them a little bit more about the carbon footprint, a little bit more about the employment generation implications of different systems, or about the differences in how durability to control production in the two systems. So we also did that. So we have a lab. It's like bringing people to a lab. Instead of having mice or rats, you have people, and you give them information. You manipulate whatever you want to do to try to to try to test hypotheses. So this is our food and brand lab. You see? So we recruited certain demographics of people that make the decisions to purchase in the household, and we brought them to the lab. So they were presented with 4 categories of tomatoes and 4 categories of lettuce, 4 combinations. Greenhouse grown in New York, field grown in New York, greenhouse grown out of state, and field grown out of state as well. Subjects, we use some techniques to really elicit the real valuation of these consumers for the different types of product. And they also completed a survey at the end to understand how demographics affect these preferences. Yeah? So we focus on beefsteak tomato, because there is lots of interest on beefsteak tomato in greenhouses in New York, and baby lettuce mix. So this is just to show you so basically, from food science and from the test that we did before the experiment, we know that in terms of the flavor and in terms of how the product looks, they look exactly the same. No difference. So it's basically the same product. Same for the greenhouse, for the baby green lettuce. So at the end, we did a lot of sessions, lots of sessions, and we got observations we got about 428 observations for tomato from 107 subjects, and lettuce, 111 subjects. We have 6 experimental sessions, and this is important because, you know, sections 1, 2, 3, subjects, we told them the production system, but we didn't give them any additional information about that. In the sessions 5, 6, and 7, they received more detailed information regarding the attributes of each product: year-round availability, food miles, and job opportunities created for local economy or outside. So this is, for example, the information for tomatoes that we gave them in the case of no information. Just told them, okay, this tomato, greenhouse grown in New York State, tomato B, field grown in New York State, tomato C, greenhouse grown out of state, all the combinations. For the sessions with information, we gave them this information. For example, this is the greenhouse grown in New York State. Greenhouses allow growers to control growing conditions to produce local tomatoes available year-round. These tomatoes are produced within the state and travel on average 150 miles, and they generate these jobs. This is based on real data. And field grown, we know that there is less control over growing conditions, and tomatoes are available only 5 months in New York in particular. Local information is the same, and the jobs created are similar. So this is just an example. So after this, what we found, these are the results. This is a summary of results. In the case of tomato, notice first that the local product, regardless of whether was produced in a greenhouse or in the field, they tend to be valued more than the product grown out of state. So that's not a surprise, because we know that there is good value on, there is always a price premium to a local product. People prefer it. This is the average willingness to pay, and this is the 4 types. So these are just descriptive statistics. So in this case, we see that in tomato, the tomato that was grown in the field received the highest price. Yeah? But the tomato that was local, produced in greenhouse, yes, there is a little difference here, but it's not that big. And yet, the difference between this CA local is much higher than the products that are coming out of state, regardless of the production system, okay? In the case of lettuce, results are a little bit different. Baby lettuce, we found that, again, the local product always gets a premium, but there is no difference whatsoever. No difference whatsoever in terms of the production system. It's interesting why is it that in the case of lettuce we don't see that different? In the case of tomato, there is a little bit of a difference between field grown and CEA. But the point here is that, yes, the big difference is between local or New York grown and out of state in both products, lettuce and the beef steak tomatoes. Okay? So we did a lot of statistics, which I'm not going to present here, but this is the bottom line. After you control for the demographics of the people, for the information that you give them, this is what we find. So in the case of tomato, the local attribute gets a price premium of 36 cents. That's about 15%, which is what we know from local products. Local products tend to get price premiums between 10 and 20%. So that's on the ballpark. However, after doing the statistical analysis, we find no difference between in the valuation of a product either produced in the field or in a greenhouse. And no difference in the valuation or the willingness to pay if you try to explain consumers exactly the difference between the two systems or not, okay? And it's very similar in lettuce, exactly the same. There is a price premium, 27 cents in average for the local product, but we found no differences in the valuation of the product, regardless of it's indifferent for consumers if the product was grown in a greenhouse or locally, and no difference in giving them a lot of information. So the implications are two. One is that we should not worry if consumers are going to still to be willing to pay more for the product that is local, regardless whether it is grown on the field or in a greenhouse. Okay? The second is that from a marketing perspective, at least what we learned from these experiments is that consumers did not react to giving them all this information about food miles and about how in greenhouses you are able to control more growing conditions than in field. They didn't react to that, at least in this experiment. So I think it's clear to see for them to just give them information where was it grown and was it field grown or greenhouse grown. And at the end, there is no difference in the willingness to pay. This is what I had to share with you. So to conclude, basically, so year-round vegetables supply in the Northeast and in New York State has been very limited. I think new developments on greenhouse technology and combined with using very cheap source of energy, especially from the waste produced by cows, is making this type of production attractive from an economic perspective. That's why we have growers, financiers. In our group, we have growers from Ohio, very interested in New York, in growing this industry. Okay? Consumers will value, according to our experiments, consumers will value this product as local. So that's good as well. And I think the industry is growing little by little. We are having certain hiccups because there are some growers that try to get the space, and then the municipalities' regulations are still not very flexible to allow greenhouses to operate in metro areas. or nearby areas. The zoning of some of the metro areas are very difficult to navigate in New York State, but I think little by little this is changing, and it's definitely an industry that I think is going to grow in 10 years. In 10 years. So thank you.
Thank you. Insightful presentation, Dr. Gomez.
Thank you.
Let's show our appreciation.
Thank you. And if you have any questions?
I'm sure we do. A lot of valuable information from the presentation. So questions from the audience?
Do you know whether the increased retail on the local product is enough to cover the cost difference between locally grown in New York and field grown out of state?
Excuse me, can you repeat the question?
Does the increase in retail on the locally grown product, is it enough to cover the difference in cost of the different growing locations? So is it $1 to produce out of state and $1.50 to produce in state?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Do you have those numbers?
So I have done it for other products. So in my experience, the only retailers that really pay a little premium for locally grown products are natural food stores and food co-ops. Retailers, we have done several surveys with the produce buyers. They will buy the local product if it looks exactly the same as the product coming from out of state, and if it is at basically the same price. A little bit of flexibility, but they are, unless they have particular programs with small farmers, family farms, which they tend to be more flexible. But I think with this, so today, no, I don't think. But as we see more commercial greenhouses able to lower the cost on a per pound basis, and still I think they need to be able to compete at retail, at the retail distribution center, to be able to get into the supermarket channel. Okay.
Good question.
If we look at New York State and Ontario province, they're substantially similar in many respects. You have a very robust greenhouse industry in Canada, both in Ontario and British, and really you don't have it in the United States. Why? What is the reason that there's been such development in Canada and not in Buffalo, Detroit, or Tacoma, Washington?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I have 3 hypotheses. One is because the type of people that moved to Canada, they were Dutch people that knew a lot about greenhouses forever. So that's one area. So they have the human capital. The second, they have a more sunlight because they are on top of the lake. We tend to get the lake effect, in more. We tend to have less light, so it's that. And energy is much cheaper. New York has one of the most expensive electricities in the country. So those are 3 hypotheses, but I don't know exactly why.
Have any partnerships been made or tested with the pairing of methane digesters of dairies and greenhouse production?
There are small initiatives now. We don't have a big one yet. The guys at ProDairy in Cornell are working on making sure that the economics are robust on this. Yeah. But I think it's ready for adoption. You always need the entrepreneur that takes the risks first. So we are kind of waiting for that.
I'm just wondering, we can all guess at why consumers are willing to pay more for local, but have you done any studies on that? What is it that they perceive to be better about local that they're willing to pay more?
So we have done research. In this particular case, it was interesting. I thought that we were going to have a lower willingness to pay for the local product producing greenhouse because past research has shown that local is associated with a smaller smaller small farms, family farms, and a product that doesn't look the same. So it has some different attribute or tastes better than the product that is coming from far away. But no, in this case, no. It was, say New York State grown, and we didn't see that difference. So I don't know. I cannot answer your question, but yeah, I think we don't know yet.
For those keeping score, the south side of the room has asked 4 questions. The north side hasn't asked any yet. So I'm going to give you a minute to think of one. So I'm combining the previous presentation where Dr. Barron told us that we've got 10 billion mouths to feed several decades from now. I'm curious, kind of what are your general thoughts about how CEA will fit into the mix in helping to close that gap?
Yeah, I think a lot, because you can be much more productive. I mean, you can get much more of a piece of land if you have a greenhouse than if you have fields. You can produce maybe 2-3 times more than you have in the field. So I think in certain places, and you see in Asia, Latin America, many programs of urban agriculture promoting small greenhouse systems in low-income neighborhoods, and that has been fantastic in terms of fruits and vegetables. Some programs are fantastic. So I think they have a lot to contribute, especially because you don't need to have fertile land. As long as you have water and access to inputs, you have more control. So.
Thank you for the presentation. We didn't talk any about food safety as it may play into this. Can
Yes.
you maybe elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, we wanted to include food safety because research indicates that the greenhouse product is safer, or the risk of a contamination is much lower. And we explored the literature on food safety. But these risks in both field and greenhouse grown are so difficult to explain to consumers. It's like your possibility of contamination is 0.0005 and there is 0.00025. We couldn't find a way to include that. So we didn't, but I think it's an important attribute, because you have more control, you may have a safer product, you may need less pesticides and agrochemicals. So that's. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to ask you a question about open field versus protected agriculture, kind of a more open and protected agriculture, defined as really anything that has got some type of protection. There are predictions out there that really we will, in 30 years, that open field agriculture will be almost a thing of the past, that we'll look at, it was the same revolution that, say, drip irrigation did in the distribution of irrigation water.
Yeah.
That basically we'll look at open field as something like almost archaic. What's kind of your crystal ball on that? Where would you bet on that?
Yes, because I have heard, I have been in discussions. No, I have no idea. I think food demand globally is growing so much that you will still need the field to produce. It's going to be important. But I think more and more in high value products, you will see more protected agriculture production to ensure to be more competitive. And because I assume in the future, you see that, for example, I was in Kenya or even in my home country, Colombia, where Chinese nationals are buying land. The price of land goes up, and for high value products, I think it will make more and more sense to use less area to produce more. So I think protected agriculture is going to continue increasing, but I don't think it's going to replace totally field. That's my feeling. It will be very sad. It's nice to be on the field working. So, yeah.
There was one more question up front. All good. Okay, well, with that, let's show our appreciation one more time for
Thank you.
Dr. Gómez.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much. And a round of applause to the audience for great questions.